The desperate call. The rocky landscape of Zora 7 stretched endlessly, barren and lifeless. Ethan adjusted his oxygen mask and scanned the horizon once again. Nothing. No movement. Just miles of red dirt and jagged rocks. He cursed under his breath, kicking a small stone that tumbled down the ridge he stood on. Ethan's ship was a wreck. What was supposed to be a simple mining mission had turned into a nightmare. A meteor storm had hit out of nowhere, shredding the ship's hull and frying its systems. The only reason Ethan was still alive was his quick thinking. He'd sealed himself in a maintenance pod seconds before the impact. But now the pod was empty, and so were his chances of survival. He tapped furiously on the emergency beacon strapped to his wrist. The blinking red light reassured him that the distress signal was still active. "Somebody better be out there," he muttered. "Anyone." The truth was, this sector of the galaxy was nearly abandoned. The mining colonies had shut down years ago, leaving planets like Zora 7 as forgotten wastelands. The odds of someone hearing his call were slim. But it was all Ethan had. Hours passed. He wandered back to the ruins of his ship, hoping to salvage something useful. The heat from the sun was unbearable, even through his protective suit. Inside the ship, the air was stifling, and the flickering lights gave the wreckage an eerie feel. Ethan rummaged through broken panels and charred wires, his hands trembling with frustration. Nothing worked. Not even the backup batteries. Sitting on the edge of a shattered console, Ethan dropped his head into his hands. He was exhausted, hungry, and completely alone. "This is it," he whispered to himself. "I'm not getting out of here." And then a sound broke the silence. It was faint at first, like static in the air. Ethan froze, holding his breath. The sound grew louder, crackling through his communicator. A voice. Deep, calm, and steady. "Distress signal received. Help is on the way." Ethan jumped to his feet, scrambling to adjust the communicator's frequency. "Hello? Hello? Who is this? Can you hear me?" The voice repeated the message, but this time, it sounded clearer. "Distress signal received. Stay where you are. Help is on the way." For the first time in hours, Ethan felt a flicker of hope. Someone had heard him. Someone was coming to save him. But as the relief settled in, doubt began to creep into his mind. The voice didn't sound human. There was something strange about its tone, something unnatural. Who, or what, was coming? Ethan didn't have time to dwell on it. A distant rumble caught his attention. He stepped outside the wrecked ship and scanned the sky. At first, he saw nothing but the endless red haze of Zora 7's atmosphere. Then, a shadow appeared on the horizon. It grew larger, moving steadily toward him. Ethan squinted, trying to make out the shape. It wasn't a rescue ship. It was too small for that. Whatever it was moving fast and kicking up a cloud of dust behind it. His heart raced as he realized it was heading straight for him. Ethan instinctively backed up, his mind racing. Should he hide? Run? But there was nowhere to go, and his oxygen supply was already running low. He gripped a metal rod he'd found in the wreckage, holding it tightly as the shadow came closer. Within minutes, the figure was clear. It wasn't a machine or a vehicle. It was a person, or at least something that looked like one. Ethan's eyes widened in disbelief as the figure stepped into view. It was a woman, but not an ordinary one. She towered over 8 feet tall, her silver armor shimmering under the harsh sunlight. Her features were sharp and alien, with glowing blue eyes that seemed to pierce through him. A long, braided strand of white hair trailed behind her as she walked, and a massive weapon rested on her back. Ethan stared, speechless. He had expected a human rescue team, maybe a nearby freighter or a passing patrol. But this was something else entirely. The Giantess stopped a few feet away from him, tilting her head as if studying him. "You," she said in a deep, resonant voice. "You called." Ethan tightened his grip on the metal rod. "Who? What are you?" The Giantess didn't answer immediately. Instead, she glanced at the wreckage of the ship, her glowing eyes scanning every detail. Then, she looked back at Ethan. "I am Kara," she said. "I heard your call. I came." Ethan swallowed hard. His mind was racing with questions, but before he could speak, Kara's expression changed. She turned her head sharply, her glowing eyes narrowing. "We must move," she said. "Danger comes." "Danger? What kind of danger?" Ethan asked, his voice trembling. Kara didn't answer. Instead, she drew her weapon in one swift motion and gestured for him to follow. "No time. Move now." Ethan hesitated for only a moment before running after her. Whoever, or whatever, Kara was, she had come to save him. And right now, she was his only chance at survival. The arrival of the Giantess. The barren landscape of Zora 7 stood still, as if holding its breath. Ethan stumbled behind Kara, the 8-foot-tall giantess, whose strides were so long that he had to jog to keep up. Dust rose with every step she took, her silver armor gleaming even in the dim, reddish light. She moved with a grace that seemed impossible for someone her size. Ethan's mind was spinning. This wasn't the rescue he'd expected. He couldn't stop staring at her, trying to piece together what he was seeing. Who, or what, was she? Her features were humanoid but alien. Her glowing blue eyes radiated intelligence and power, and her voice, deep and calm, still echoed in his ears. "Danger comes." "Wait, wait," Ethan finally shouted, gasping for breath. Kara halted abruptly, turning her head slightly, her expression unreadable. "What are we running from?" Ethan demanded, clutching his knees. His breath came in short bursts as the thin atmosphere drained his energy. "I don't even know what's going on. Are you human?" Kara tilted her head, as if considering his question. "No," she said simply, her voice steady. "Not human." "Great," Ethan muttered, wiping the sweat off his brow. "Not human. That explains everything." Kara didn't seem to care about his sarcasm. She crouched, her glowing eyes scanning the horizon with an intensity that made Ethan uneasy. Finally, she pointed to the sky. "They come." Ethan followed her gaze and froze. In the distance, faint specks appeared, growing larger with every passing second. His stomach dropped as he recognized the triangular shape of the approaching ships. The Zarnak raiders. "Oh no," Ethan whispered. He'd heard the stories. Pirates who left no survivors. They raided colonies, enslaved workers, and destroyed everything else. He'd thought the rumors were exaggerated, but now, seeing their ships with his own eyes, he realized the truth was far worse. "They hunt me," Kara said, standing to her full height. Her voice was calm, but there was a sharp edge to it now. "But your distress signal, it gave them a trail." Ethan's eyes widened. "My distress signal? You mean they're here because of me?" Kara didn't answer. Instead, she unsheathed the massive weapon from her back, a sleek, obsidian blade that hummed with energy. Ethan stumbled back, instinctively raising his hands. "Whoa, whoa, what are you doing?" Kara glanced down at him, her expression softening for the first time. "I protect you." Ethan blinked, unsure whether to feel relieved or terrified. Before he could respond, a deafening roar filled the air. The Zarnak ships descended rapidly, their engines creating a low, bone-rattling hum. Dust and debris swirled around them as they landed with a thunderous crash, and the ship doors began to open. Kara's demeanor shifted instantly. She stood tall, her glowing eyes fixed on the enemy ships. "Stay close," she said firmly. "Do not slow me down." Ethan hesitated. "Wait, you're going to fight them? Alone?" Kara turned to him, and for the first time, there was something almost amused in her expression. "Alone is how I fight best." Before Ethan could argue, Kara moved, faster than he thought possible for someone her size. She sprinted toward a cluster of jagged rocks, motioning for him to follow. Ethan scrambled after her, heart pounding in his chest. Behind them, the Zarnak raiders began to emerge. Hulking figures clad in black, spiked armor, their weapons glinting menacingly in the light. "Kara, there's too many of them," Ethan hissed, crouching behind the rocks. Kara didn't respond. Instead, she reached into a compartment on her armor and pulled out a small circular device. She pressed a button, and the device emitted a low-frequency hum. Ethan frowned. "What is that?" "Signal jammer," Kara explained. "They will not call reinforcements." Ethan nodded, impressed despite himself. But the Zarnak raiders weren't waiting. One of them, a towering brute with glowing red eyes, pointed in their direction and barked an order in an alien language. A group of 5 raiders broke off, charging toward the rocks where Ethan and Kara were hiding. Ethan's pulse skyrocketed. "Ah, Kara, they're coming." Kara stood, her massive blade humming with energy. She turned to Ethan and said, "Stay here. Do not move." Before Ethan could protest, Kara leaped over the rocks, landing directly in the path of the raiders. The ground shook beneath her as she raised her weapon. The raiders hesitated for a moment, clearly taken aback by her size and presence, but then they roared, rushing at her with blasters raised. Ethan peeked over the rocks, his eyes wide. What he saw made his breath catch. Kara moved like a force of nature. Her blade sliced through the air with precision, deflecting blaster shots and cutting down raiders with terrifying efficiency. She was faster, stronger, and smarter than any of them. One raider tried to flank her, but she anticipated the move, spinning around and delivering a crushing blow with the hilt of her weapon. Another lunged at her with a serrated blade, only to be sent flying with a single punch. Ethan's mouth fell open. He'd never seen anything like this. Kara wasn't just fighting, she was dominating. But the battle wasn't over. More raiders were approaching, and Kara was starting to show signs of strain. Her movements, though precise, were slowing. Sweat dripped down her face, and her breathing grew heavier. Ethan clenched his fists. He couldn't just sit there and watch. He scanned the area, searching for something, anything that could help. His eyes landed on a jagged piece of metal from the wreckage of his ship. It wasn't much, but it was sharp and sturdy. Grabbing it, he stepped out from behind the rocks. "Ethan." Kara's voice was sharp, but he ignored her. If they were going to survive, he had to do something. As a raider charged toward Kara's exposed flank, Ethan ran forward, yelling at the top of his lungs. The raider turned, confused, just in time for Ethan to drive the metal shard into its side. The raider let out a guttural roar, stumbling backward. Kara took advantage of the distraction, delivering a devastating blow to the raider's chest. She turned to Ethan, her glowing eyes narrowing. "You are reckless," she said, but there was no anger in her voice, only respect. Ethan grinned nervously. "Yeah, well, I couldn't let you have all the fun." Kara shook her head, but a small smile tugged at her lips. "Stay close," she said again. "The real fight begins now." Behind them, the Zarnak commander stepped out of his ship, a massive cyborg towering even over Kara. His red eyes glowed with malice, and his mechanical arm crackled with electricity. Ethan swallowed hard. Great, just great. The hidden enemy. The air felt heavier as the Zarnak commander strode forward, each step reverberating like distant thunder. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. The commander was a terrifying figure, standing over 10 feet tall, with a body that was more machine than flesh. His mechanical arms sparked menacingly, and his deep, guttural voice growled orders to his raiders. Kara didn't flinch. She adjusted her grip on her weapon, her glowing blue eyes locked on the cyborg. "Run," she said without looking at Ethan. "What?" Ethan's voice cracked. "Run where?" "There's nowhere to go." Kara shot him a glance, her voice calm but firm. "Do not argue. I hold them. You go." Ethan opened his mouth to protest, but a sudden explosion cut him off. The ground shook violently as the commander raised his massive arm, releasing a surge of energy that obliterated a nearby boulder. Dust and debris filled the air, and Ethan coughed as he stumbled backward. "I can't just leave you," he shouted. Kara didn't respond. Instead, she stepped forward, meeting the commander's gaze. The two titans squared off, and for a moment, everything else seemed to fade away. The tension was so thick it was almost suffocating. Ethan's instincts screamed at him to run, but he hesitated. His eyes darted around, searching for anything that could give them an advantage. That's when he noticed the jagged entrance to a cave system just a few hundred meters away. The dark opening was partially obscured by rocks, but it was big enough to slip through. "Kara," Ethan yelled, pointing toward the cave. "We can hide in there." Kara glanced at the cave, her expression unreadable. The commander took advantage of her momentary distraction, lunging forward with surprising speed. His mechanical arm swung in a wide arc, crackling with energy. Kara barely dodged in time, rolling to the side and retaliating with a swift strike of her blade. The weapon hummed as it clashed against the commander's metallic arm, sending sparks flying. "Move!" Kara barked at Ethan, her voice cutting through the chaos. This time, Ethan obeyed. He sprinted toward the cave, adrenaline fueling his every step. Behind him, he could hear the sounds of the battle, the clash of metal, the roar of the commander, and Kara's sharp, commanding voice. He didn't dare look back. The cave was darker than he'd expected, its narrow entrance quickly giving way to a sprawling network of tunnels. Ethan slowed down, his eyes adjusting to the dim light. The air was cooler here, carrying a faint metallic tang. He hesitated, unsure which path to take. A moment later, Kara appeared behind him, her armor scuffed, but her expression as stoic as ever. She was breathing heavily, and her glowing eyes flickered slightly, something Ethan hadn't seen before. "They'd follow," she said simply. Ethan's stomach twisted. "What do we do now?" Kara gestured deeper into the cave. "We go. Farther. Farther. This place looks like a maze. How do you even know where it leads?" Kara didn't answer immediately. Instead, she placed her hand on the cave wall, her fingers brushing against ancient symbols etched into the stone. The markings began to glow faintly under her touch, their light illuminating the path ahead. Ethan stared, his mouth hanging open. What is that?" "Old," Kara said. "Older than your kind. My people once walked here." "Your people? Wait, you've been here before." Kara shook her head. "Not me, but my ancestors." She turned to Ethan, her expression grave. "The Zarnak seek more than you. They seek this place." Ethan frowned. "Why?" "It's just a cave." Kara's eyes narrowed. "Not just a cave. It is a vault. A weapon lies here, a weapon they must not have." Before Ethan could ask more, a distant roar echoed through the tunnels. The Zarnak raiders were closing in. Kara grabbed his arm, pulling him forward. "No time. Move." They navigated the winding tunnels, Kara leading the way with an unerring sense of direction. The glowing symbols on the walls grew brighter the deeper they went, casting eerie shadows that danced like specters. Ethan tried to focus on keeping up, but his mind was racing. A vault? A weapon? What had he stumbled into? Suddenly, Kara stopped, holding up a hand to signal silence. Ethan froze, his breath caught in his throat. He strained his ears, and then he heard it, a faint mechanical hum growing louder by the second. "They are near," Kara whispered. "Stay close." The tunnel opened up into a massive underground chamber, and Ethan's eyes widened in awe. The ceiling soared high above them, and in the center of the chamber stood a towering structure that pulsed with an otherworldly energy. It looked like an obelisk, its surface covered in the same glowing symbols as the walls. The air around it shimmered, and a low, rhythmic hum filled the chamber. "What is that?" Ethan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "The vault," Kara said. "It hides the weapon." Ethan took a step forward, but Kara grabbed his shoulder, stopping him. "Do not touch it. It is unstable." "Unstable? Then why are we here?" Kara's expression hardened. Because it is our only chance. Before Ethan could press her for more answers, a deafening crash echoed through the chamber. The Zarnak raiders had found them. Dozens of them poured into the room, their weapons raised and their eyes glowing with malice. The commander entered last, his massive frame blocking the tunnel behind him. Kara stepped forward, her blade at the ready. "Ethan," she said without turning, "you must trust me." Ethan's throat went dry. "Trust you? What are you going to do?" Kara didn't answer. Instead, she raised her free hand and placed it on the obelisk. The glowing symbols intensified, and the entire chamber began to tremble. The hum of the obelisk grew louder, becoming a deafening roar. The Zarnak raiders hesitated, clearly unnerved by the sudden change. The commander snarled, barking orders for them to advance. Kara tightened her grip on her weapon, her voice steady as she said, "Run, Ethan. Whatever happens, do not stop." Ethan's legs felt like lead, but he forced himself to move, sprinting toward the far end of the chamber. Behind him, the sound of battle erupted once again, Kara's blade cutting through the chaos. The obelisk's light grew blinding, and Ethan shielded his eyes as he stumbled through the tunnel. For the second time that day, Ethan realized he was in way over his head. The chase. The air in the tunnels was suffocating, filled with the distant echoes of footsteps and guttural roars from the Zarnak raiders. Ethan ran as fast as his legs could carry him, his heart pounding in his chest. Behind him, the glow of the obelisk pulsed like a heartbeat, casting fleeting shadows that danced ominously along the walls. Kara appeared beside him, moving effortlessly despite her size. Her glowing blue eyes flickered faintly, and the wear on her armor was more evident now. Scratches, scorch marks, and a jagged dent near her shoulder. Yet, her pace never faltered. Her voice, calm but commanding, broke through the chaos. "Faster! They are coming. I'm already running." Ethan snapped, gasping for breath. The thin atmosphere of Zora 7 made every step feel like a battle. Where are we even going? This tunnel could be a dead end. Kara didn't slow down or look at him. "Trust me. That's getting harder to do." Ethan shot back, but kept following her. He didn't have a choice. The tunnel twisted and turned, narrowing at some points and opening into cavernous spaces at others. The glowing symbols on the walls were now fainter, their light dimming as they moved farther from the obelisk. Ethan chanced a glance over his shoulder and immediately regretted it. The Zarnak raiders were closing in. Their heavy boots pounded against the stone floor, and their guttural growls sent chills down his spine. "Kara," Ethan hissed, "they're gaining on us." Kara's eyes darted to the walls, searching for something. Finally, she stopped abruptly, nearly causing Ethan to crash into her. "Here," she said, placing her hand on a section of the wall covered in symbols. "What are you?" Ethan started, but his words were cut off as the wall groaned and shifted. A hidden door slid open, revealing a narrow passageway. "In," Kara ordered, pulling him through the opening. The door began to close behind them, but not fast enough. One of the raiders lunged forward, wedging his massive arm between the sliding panels. Kara moved like lightning, her blade flashing as she severed the raider's arm with a single strike. The door slammed shut, muffling the raider's agonized roar. Ethan stared at her, wide-eyed. "Remind me never to get on your bad side." Kara didn't respond. Instead, she turned and started down the narrow passageway, her movements more deliberate now. Ethan followed, his breathing ragged. The air was colder here, and the walls were smooth, as if carved by machines rather than natural forces. After a few minutes of tense silence, Ethan couldn't hold back his questions any longer. "Okay, you need to explain what's going on. What is this place? What's that obelisk thing? And why are those raiders so desperate to catch you?" Kara stopped, turning to face him. Her glowing eyes met his, and for a moment, she seemed almost hesitant. Finally, she spoke. "This is an ancient vault, built by the Varika. My people, the obelisk you saw is a key. It guards something powerful. Powerful? Ethan's brow furrowed. You mean a weapon? Kara nodded. A weapon capable of destroying entire fleets. The Zarnak wanted to conquer the galaxy. My mission is to ensure they never find it. Ethan's stomach sank. And you thought it was a good idea to bring me here? If they get that thing, it's my fault. Kara's expression softened slightly. Your distress signal led them here, yes. But it also brought me here. You did not know. You are innocent. Ethan scoffed. Yeah, tell that to the billions of people who'll get wiped out if we fail. Kara placed a hand on his shoulder, her grip firm but reassuring. We will not fail. Trust me. Before Ethan could respond, the faint sound of machinery caught his attention. Kara's head snapped toward the noise, her expression hardening. They have found another way in. Of course they have, Ethan muttered. Why wouldn't they? Kara moved quickly, scanning the passageway ahead. Her hand brushed against the wall, and a new set of symbols began to glow. This way, she said, her tone urgent. They emerged into a large chamber, its ceiling so high it disappeared into darkness. Strange machinery lined the walls, ancient, rusted, but still humming faintly with power. In the center of the room stood a massive pedestal, and atop it was a small, glowing orb. The light from the orb pulsed gently, casting an eerie glow across the room. What is that? Ethan asked, eyeing the orb warily. Kara approached the pedestal, her movements cautious. A fragment of the weapon's power. It will help us. Help us how? Ethan took a step back. Because it looks like touching that thing is a bad idea. Kara ignored him, reaching out and placing her hand on the orb. The room immediately shook, and the machinery along the walls roared to life. Ethan stumbled, grabbing onto a nearby console for support. What did you do? Kara turned to him, the orb now hovering above her hand. It will slow them down. The ground rumbled again, and the walls began to shift. Sections of the chamber collapsed, blocking off entrances as the machinery created barriers. But the Zarnak raiders were relentless. Through the chaos, Ethan could see them forcing their way into the chamber, their weapons raised. Kara stepped forward, her blade glowing brighter than ever. Go, she said, her voice steady. I will hold them. Ethan's eyes widened. You can't fight them all. We need to stick together. Kara's gaze softened for just a moment. You are brave, Ethan. But this is my fight. Before Ethan could argue, Kara raised her blade and charged toward the raiders, her battle cry echoing through the chamber. The sound of clashing metal and roaring energy filled the air as she engaged the enemy. Ethan hesitated, his instincts screaming at him to run but his heart telling him to stay. Finally, he turned and sprinted toward the far end of the chamber, following the faint glow of the orb's light as it illuminated the path ahead. Behind him, Kara's voice rang out, strong and unyielding. Go, human. Fulfill your part. The fight is not over. A risky alliance. The tunnel opened into a dimly lit corridor, its walls etched with intricate carvings that pulsed faintly, as if alive. Ethan slowed his pace, his breath ragged from running. The distant sounds of Kara's battle with the Zarnak raiders echoed faintly behind him, a haunting reminder of the chaos he had left behind. He leaned against the wall, trying to steady his nerves. She's insane, he muttered to himself. Absolutely insane. How does she expect me to fulfill my part? I don't even know what I'm doing. The orb in his hand glowed faintly, its light flickering in rhythm with his quickened heartbeat. It felt warm, almost alive, as if it were aware of his presence. Ethan stared at it, his mind racing. What was this thing? How could it possibly help? And why had Kara entrusted him with it? His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps. Ethan tensed, clutching the orb tightly. The footsteps were heavy and deliberate, definitely not Kara's. Panic surged through him as he realized the Zarnak raiders were closing in. No, he whispered, scanning the corridor for an escape route. His eyes landed on a small alcove partially hidden behind a collapsed section of the wall. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. Ethan ducked into the alcove, pressing himself against the cold stone. He held his breath as the footsteps grew louder, accompanied by guttural voices speaking in an alien language. The shadows of the raiders danced on the wall, their weapons glinting ominously in the dim light. "Please don't see me. Please don't see me," Ethan repeated in his head, gripping the orb so tightly his knuckles turned white. One of the raiders stopped just a few feet from the alcove, sniffing the air like a predator hunting its prey. Ethan's heart felt like it might burst from his chest. The raider growled something to its companion, and for a terrifying moment, Ethan thought they were going to find him. But then, a distant explosion rocked the corridor, and the raiders turned their heads sharply. The guttural voices grew more urgent as they moved toward the source of the noise. Within moments, the corridor was silent again. Ethan exhaled shakily, his body trembling with relief. "That was too close," he muttered, stepping out of the alcove. He glanced down at the orb, its light brighter now, as if urging him forward. "Okay, you want me to keep moving. Fine. Let's see where this leads." He followed the orb's faint glow, the carvings on the walls becoming more intricate the farther he went. The air grew colder, and a low hum filled the corridor, vibrating through the stone. Ethan couldn't tell if the sound was coming from the orb or the walls themselves, but it sent a chill down his spine. After what felt like an eternity, the corridor opened into a massive chamber. Ethan stopped in his tracks, his eyes widening in awe. The chamber was unlike anything he'd ever seen, a vast, circular space with a domed ceiling covered in glowing symbols. In the center of the room stood a pedestal, much like the one Kara had activated earlier. But this one was surrounded by floating shards of crystal, each pulsating with the same eerie light as the orb. Ethan approached cautiously, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. As he neared the pedestal, the orb in his hand began to vibrate, its glow intensifying. The floating crystals reacted, their light shifting to match the rhythm of the orb. "Okay," Ethan said nervously. "This is either really good or really bad." The carvings on the pedestal began to glow, and a deep, resonant voice filled the chamber. It spoke in a language Ethan didn't understand, but the tone was commanding, almost regal. The orb floated out of his hand, hovering above the pedestal as the crystals aligned themselves around it. Ethan stepped back, his pulse quickening. "What's happening?" The voice grew louder, and the light in the chamber intensified. The orb emitted a beam of energy that connected with the crystals, forming a web of glowing lines that filled the air. Ethan shielded his eyes, barely able to make out the shapes of the lines as they twisted and turned, forming an intricate pattern. And then the voice stopped. The light faded, leaving only the faint glow of the carvings and crystals. The orb hovered above the pedestal, its light steady and calm. Ethan approached cautiously, his curiosity outweighing his fear. What are you?" As if in response, the orb pulsed, and an image appeared in the air, a hologram of Kara. But it wasn't the Kara he knew. This version looked younger, her features softer, and her eyes lacked the battle-hardened intensity he had come to recognize. The hologram spoke, its voice calm and melodic. "To the one who holds this fragment, you carry the hope of the Varika. This vault contains the knowledge and power to protect or destroy. Choose wisely, for the fate of many rests in your hands." Ethan stared at the hologram, his mind racing. Protect or destroy. What does that even mean? How am I supposed to make a decision like that? The hologram faded, and the chamber fell silent once more. Ethan looked at the orb, his reflection distorted in its glowing surface. He felt a heavy weight settle on his shoulders. Kara had entrusted him with this, but why? What could he possibly do against an enemy like the Zarnak? Before he could dwell on his doubts, the sound of footsteps echoed through the chamber. Ethan's head snapped toward the entrance, where a group of Zarnak raiders had appeared. Their weapons were raised, and their glowing eyes locked onto him. "Of course," Ethan muttered. Why would anything be easy? He grabbed the orb from the pedestal and ran toward the nearest tunnel, the sound of the raiders' pursuit ringing in his ears. The chase was far from over, and Ethan knew he was running out of time. The final stand. The corridors of the ancient vault shook as Ethan sprinted down them, clutching the glowing orb against his chest. The distant roars of the Zarnak raiders echoed behind him, a chilling reminder that time was running out. His lungs burned with every breath, and his legs felt like lead, but he couldn't stop. Not now. He burst into another chamber, this one smaller and more enclosed, with thick pillars carved from a shimmering metallic stone. The symbols on the walls glowed faintly, casting eerie shadows across the room. Ethan skidded to a halt, his eyes darting around for an exit. There were 2 tunnels ahead, both equally dark and foreboding. Which one? He muttered to himself, glancing at the orb as if expecting it to answer. To his surprise, the orb pulsed, its light growing brighter as he pointed it toward the right-hand tunnel. "Well, that's as good a sign as any," Ethan said, turning toward the illuminated path. Before he could move, a deafening crash shook the chamber, and a massive section of the wall crumbled. Ethan spun around, his heart leaping into his throat. The Zarnak commander stepped through the rubble, his towering frame illuminated by the glow of the vault's symbols. His red eyes burned with malice, and his mechanical arm crackled with energy. Ethan froze. "Oh, come on. Can't you give me a 5-minute head start?" The commander didn't reply. Instead, he raised his mechanical arm, and a bolt of energy shot toward Ethan. He barely dove out of the way in time, the blast striking a pillar and sending shards of stone flying in all directions. Scrambling to his feet, Ethan clutched the orb tighter. "Okay, think," he muttered, his mind racing. "You're not Kara. You can't fight this guy. What would she do?" As if on cue, the orb pulsed again, its light intensifying. Ethan glanced at it, his eyes narrowing. "You're trying to tell me something, aren't you?" The commander charged, his footsteps thundering against the stone floor. Ethan barely had time to react, darting behind a pillar as the cyborg's massive fist smashed into it, sending cracks spiderwebbing across the surface. Ethan peeked out from behind the pillar, his breath coming in short gasps. The orb's glow seemed to be pointing toward the left side of the chamber, where an array of ancient machinery stood, covered in dust and cobwebs. "Great," Ethan muttered. "Ancient alien tech. What could possibly go wrong?" He sprinted toward the machinery, dodging another energy blast that sent chunks of stone raining down around him. The Zarnak commander roared in frustration, his mechanical arm sparking dangerously as he pursued. Reaching the machinery, Ethan frantically examined the controls. The alien symbols were incomprehensible, but some of them glowed faintly, as if still functional. He hesitated, his fingers hovering over the controls. "Ethan, if you press the wrong button, you're dead," he whispered to himself. "Then again, if you do nothing, you're also dead." So, he slammed his hand down on the nearest glowing symbol. The machinery roared to life, gears grinding and lights flickering as ancient energy surged through it. A low hum filled the chamber, growing louder with each passing second. The Zarnak commander stopped, his glowing red eyes narrowing as he realized what was happening. He raised his arm, aiming directly at Ethan. Come on," Ethan muttered, pressing more symbols at random. The machinery responded, its hum reaching a deafening pitch. Suddenly, a beam of light shot out from the apparatus, striking the orb in Ethan's hand. The orb absorbed the energy, its glow intensifying until it was almost blinding. Ethan shielded his eyes, feeling a strange warmth radiate from the object. The Zarnak commander hesitated, his mechanical arm faltering as the light filled the chamber. Then, with a burst of energy, the orb unleashed a shockwave. The force threw Ethan backward, slamming him against a pillar. He groaned, his vision swimming as he tried to focus. The commander was sent reeling, his massive frame crashing into the wall. Ethan staggered to his feet, clutching his side. The orb now hovered in midair, its light pulsating rhythmically. The machinery around it seemed to respond, sending streams of energy into the walls. The symbols on the walls and ceiling glowed brighter than ever, and the entire chamber began to tremble. The Zarnak commander rose slowly, his movements jerky as if the shockwave had damaged his systems. His red eyes locked onto Ethan, and he roared, charging with renewed fury. Ethan's mind raced. He couldn't outrun the commander, and he certainly couldn't fight him. But maybe he didn't have to. The orb pulsed again, and Ethan realized it was reacting to the symbols on the wall. "You're trying to activate something," he said aloud. "But what?" He glanced at the machinery and noticed a final glowing symbol on the console. Taking a deep breath, he slammed his hand down on it. The entire chamber lit up, and a deep, resonant voice echoed through the air. The language was alien, but the intent was clear. A protective field of energy erupted around the orb, expanding outward and pushing the Zarnak commander back. The cyborg roared in defiance, his mechanical arm firing wildly, but the energy absorbed the blasts. Ethan watched in awe as the light filled the chamber, spreading through the corridors and into the vault beyond. The machinery groaned and sputtered, its ancient systems straining under the power surge. The orb floated higher, its light intensifying until it became almost unbearable to look at. Then, with a final, blinding flash, the orb released a wave of energy that rippled through the chamber. The Zarnak commander let out one last roar before his mechanical systems overloaded, sparks flying as he collapsed to the ground, motionless. Ethan shielded his eyes, his heart pounding. When the light faded, the chamber was silent. The orb hovered for a moment longer before slowly descending, its glow dimming until it returned to its original faint light. Ethan approached cautiously, picking up the orb. "Well," he said, his voice trembling. "That was something." Before he could catch his breath, a familiar voice called out from the tunnel, "Ethan." He turned to see Kara, battered but alive, her glowing blue eyes locking onto his. She approached, her movements slow but steady. "You did it," she said, a faint smile on her lips. Ethan held up the orb. "I think we did it." Kara nodded, glancing at the fallen commander. "But the fight is not over. They will come again." Ethan sighed. "Of course they will." Kara placed a hand on his shoulder. "But now, we have hope, victory, and goodbye." The chamber was silent, the hum of the ancient machinery fading into the background as Ethan and Kara stood amidst the aftermath of their desperate stand. The air still crackled faintly with residual energy from the orb's blast, and the symbols on the walls pulsed faintly, like the heartbeat of a living organism. The Zarnak commander lay in a crumpled heap near the edge of the room, his mechanical body sparking and twitching, a once unstoppable force reduced to rubble. Ethan exhaled, the weight of the moment hitting him like a freight train. "We survived," he said, half laughing, half disbelieving. "I can't believe we actually survived." Kara approached the fallen commander, her movements slower than usual, her exhaustion evident. She placed a booted foot on his chest, her glowing blue eyes scanning his motionless form. "He is finished," she said, her voice calm but firm. "But others will come." Ethan groaned. "Why is it never just over? Can't we have one clean win?" Kara's lips curled into the faintest hint of a smile. "Victory is rarely clean, human." Ethan shook his head, still clutching the orb. It had gone cold now, its light dim, but he could feel the immense power within it. "This thing," he said, holding it up. "It's incredible." "What is it, really? I know you said it's part of some ancient weapon, but it feels like more than that." Kara turned to face him, her expression softening. "It is a fragment of the Varika's legacy," she said. "A piece of our history, our knowledge, and our hope. It was never meant to be a weapon. It was meant to protect, to guide." Ethan frowned. "But you said it could destroy fleets." Kara nodded. "Power does not choose how it is used. That choice is ours." Her words lingered in the air, heavy with meaning. Ethan looked at the orb again, his reflection distorted in its surface. For a moment, he thought he saw something, images flashing within the glow. Stars, battles, cities, and then nothing. He shook his head, trying to clear his thoughts. "So what happens now?" he asked. "Do we just leave this here and hope the Zarnak don't come back?" Kara stepped closer, her towering frame casting a long shadow over him. "No," she said, "we cannot leave it here. They will find it again. And next time, there may not be anyone to stop them." Ethan's stomach sank. "So we take it with us?" Kara shook her head. "It is not so simple. The orb is tied to this place. It draws its strength from the vault, from the ancient energy that flows through these walls. If we remove it, it will fade." Ethan stared at her, his frustration bubbling to the surface. "Then what's the plan, Kara? You're the one with all the answers, right? How do we stop them for good?" Kara hesitated, her gaze drifting to the orb. For the first time since Ethan had met her, she looked unsure. "There is a way," she said finally, "but it is not without risk." "Of course it isn't," Ethan muttered. "Let's hear it." Kara gestured toward the pedestal where the orb had originally rested. "If we return the orb to its place, it will activate the vault's final defense, a barrier powerful enough to seal this entire structure. No one will be able to enter. Not the Zarnak. Not us." Ethan's eyes widened. "Wait. Seal it? As in, permanently?" Kara nodded. "Yes." Ethan paced, running a hand through his hair. "And what happens to you? To me? Are we just trapped in here forever?" Kara's expression grew solemn. "The barrier will allow us time to escape, but once it is activated, the vault will close. The knowledge, the power, all of it will be lost." Ethan stopped pacing, staring at her. "You're willing to give up your people's legacy, everything they built?" Kara's gaze hardened. "If it means saving countless lives, yes." The weight of her words hit him like a ton of bricks. He looked at the orb, then at the pedestal, then back at Kara. "You really believe this is the only way?" Kara stepped closer, placing a hand on his shoulder. "I do," she said softly. "And I believe in you, Ethan. You have shown courage, strength, and heart. That is why I trust you to make the choice." Ethan's chest tightened. "You're really putting this on me?" Kara's lips curled into a faint smile. "You are human. Your kind has always been good at making impossible choices." Ethan swallowed hard, his mind racing. He could feel the weight of the orb in his hand, the immense responsibility it represented. Finally, he nodded. "Okay, let's do it." Kara guided him to the pedestal, her movements deliberate. As Ethan placed the orb back into its cradle, the chamber trembled. The symbols on the walls glowed brighter, and a deep resonant hum filled the air. The orb pulsed, sending waves of energy through the room. The walls began to shift, sealing the entranceways one by one. Kara turned to Ethan, her voice steady. "We must go, now."